Hello and welcome to UGC EPG Pathshala. I am Atika Tajdar from Department of Geography, Jamia Millia Islamia. I am presenting this module on behalf of Mr. Rajneesh Ranjan. Today we will discuss about mainstreaming disaster risk reduction in developmental planning. When any disaster strikes the community or society, it disrupts the progress and wipe out the long achieved developmental efforts, often taking nation backward for a long term in their mission for progress. When disasters strike, it creates severe impact on development process and people are deprived of the outcome of development. They lose their life and livelihood. Poor and underprivileged class of people are severely affected and their condition are turned into extreme poverty in a matter of hours. The overall aim of the developmental planning gets shattered and meaningless for those whom development was planned. Over the year, it has been observed that natural and man-made disasters have been creating adverse impact on all kind of developmental planning, as the overall strategies of planning right from the conceptualization to the implementation stage doesn't automatically address the concern of disaster risk reduction. Generally, it happens that communities are left under the extreme vulnerabilities of disaster because humanitarian or developmental intervention have rather added more vulnerabilities in the existing one. It is therefore essential that developmental intervention should be designed in such a way that it can create new opportunities of disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction has been defined by United Nations as the conceptual framework of element considered with the possibilities to minimize vulnerabilities and disaster risk throughout a society to prevent or to mitigate the adverse impact of hazard within the broad context of sustainable development. Now we will discuss mainstreaming disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction is a set of measures used to reduce the direct, indirect and intangible losses occurred due to disasters. This may be technical, economic or social. Mainstreaming disaster risk reduction or DRR refer to the process that incorporate the concern of disaster preparedness, prevention and mitigation into developmental planning as well as in the policies of post-disaster recovery and practices. This aims towards complete institutionalization of DRR within the developmental planning agenda. Objectives of mainstreaming DRR. The following are the main objectives of mainstreaming DRR into developmental planning. The first one is all the ongoing scheme of the Government of India as well as state governments and other subsidiary agencies must be selectively audited by designated government agencies in order to ensure that they have properly addressed the concern of disaster risk reduction in their developmental planning. Second, all the developmental scheme well at the level of conceptualization or funding stage shall consider incorporating issues of potential hazards associated with their developmental planning strategies and accordingly shall incorporate measures to mitigate the same. Third, there should be pragmatic approach to all the developmental schemes by incorporating the local risk and vulnerability of disasters, ensuring that the concerned schemes have appropriately addressed the concerns and specific and pragmatic mitigation approach of potential disasters be incorporated. Fourth, all the relief and recovery programs undertaken by states and district disaster management authorities must take into consideration the compliance of DRR components. Component of mainstreaming. While adopting mainstreaming DRR in any of the developmental planning of the following components or categories must be taken into consideration. Integration of DRR developmental policy, mainstreaming DRR in developmental strategy, strengthening of DRR through training and capacity building intervention, HVRC analysis at the micro level, mainstreaming DRR in project cycle management, mutual collaboration with other stakeholders, integration of DRR in developmental policy. While ensuring mainstreaming DRR in developmental planning, there need to have a clear-cut integration of policy on DRR approach that could protect developmental initiative from any possible threat of disasters. For example, in the petroleum NG storage of any establishment, there could be a possible threat of lightning that might catch fire in the entire establishment. Thus, there is a need of policy level integration of installing lightning detection sensor or lightning conductor so that the possible threat of lightning could be minimized and potential disasters could be averted. In similar manner, non-governmental organizations or NGOs having adequate technical knowledge on shelter can provide support to the government in integrating the policy on same in developmental planning approach. Mainstreaming DRR in developmental strategies. Many of the stakeholders translate their organizational goals and policies into detailed strategies for action. During this stage, department or NGOs and other stakeholders may ensure mainstreaming DRR in their policy strategies. As for example, a project on covering all the PPL beneficiaries under the policy of education for all, there may integration of school safety and water and sanitation initiative for the targeted beneficiaries. Strengthening of DRR through training and capacity building. Interventions, training and capacity building play greater role in mainstreaming DRR. When it comes to developmental planning, training and capacity building interventions may strengthen the effort of mainstreaming at every level by integrating vital knowledge and skills on disaster risk reduction. There are various methods through which knowledge management and capacity building can be adopted. First is curriculum development and capacity building in educational institution. Second, dissemination of knowledge and skills on disaster risk reduction. Third, translation of conceptual or academic research finding into easy to understand information. Fourth, dissemination of information by way of media, campaigns, workshops, seminars, symposiums, etc. Fifth, development of e-learning for dissemination of information or education. Sixth, dissemination of knowledge through local language or dialect. Now we will discuss hazard, vulnerability and risk analysis at the micro level. The geographical and geological conditions of the concerned area determine the hazard, vulnerability and risk condition. Locational aspect of developmental project decided on the basis of hazard, risk and vulnerability analysis of a given area would be part of the risk reduction strategy. These factors determine where to place developmental project. The concerned department or agencies should conduct or facilitate hazard, risk and vulnerability analysis of a given area and take into consideration the outcome of the analysis into developmental planning. Based on these input, relocation of the developmental project may also be considered. In addition, the HVR analysis may also give adequate information of the potential vulnerability, and the concerned stakeholder can sensitize vulnerable community about their potential hazard and likelihood of disaster, which is an example in water deficit areas. Instead of drilling more bore wells, it is much advisable to apply the knowledge of water budgeting or restrict settlement in flood prone areas. Now we will discuss mainstreaming DRR in project cycle management. During the management of any project, it is essential to integrate the knowledge of DRR in various phases of project cycle so that DRR can become a part of successful project management. The project management unit must also ensure that their DRR approach should not further increase vulnerability, rather must be instrumental in reducing vulnerability. Example, in housing product, considering DRR approach may reduce the vulnerability of multiple disasters. Mutual collaboration with other stakeholders. In order to promote mainstreaming DRR into developmental planning, there is a need to have collaboration between government, non-government and other stakeholders. The improved coordination may strengthen mainstream DRR successfully into developmental planning. The improved coordination may be relevant in all the phases of disaster like prevention, preparedness and mitigation. Sector-wise mainstreaming disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction plan must be integrated with social welfare scheme launched by the central and state government. The statutory provision in different plans provide opportunities to prepare holistic plans and disaster management covering the cycle of disaster management integrating macro level and micro level policy of implementation. There are various sectors wherein DRR may be integrated to have a better culture of resilience at all levels. Mainstreaming DRR in shelter and infrastructure management, mainstreaming DRR into livelihood, mainstreaming DRR into food security and nutrition, mainstreaming DRR into health services, mainstreaming DRR in water sanitation and hygiene, mainstreaming DRR in education sector, integrating in DRR environment planning, shelter and infrastructure management. In any disaster situation, huge losses occur due to destruction of shelter and associated infrastructure, which create challenge among responder and disaster manager to deal with the situation. In order to reduce the impact of disaster, there is a need to focus more emphasis on adopting disaster risk reduction strategies in shelter development plan. There should be quality standard and guideline for infrastructure development with emphasis on hazard resistant construction and shelter designing. Appropriate legislation must be in place to fix the accountability of agencies in ensuring DRR adoption. In addition, appropriate land use planning strategies must also be in place in vulnerable areas. The advocacy and awareness also play an important role in shelter and infrastructure. We must ensure that the implementing agencies and people are aware of new disaster resilient construction technique. In addition, institutional arrangements should also be in place to promote the use of calamity resistant techniques, including retrofitting, and affected people, include the most vulnerable, are aware of their land and housing rights. For having a good shelter, there also need to have a better coordination and capacity building plans. Necessary technical training must be imparted to stakeholders, including project staff, inspectors, NGOs and other stakeholders. Mainstreaming DRR into livelihood. It's a challenging for the integration of DRR into livelihoods in order to sustain the socio-economic development achieved in development process. Land use planning and micro-insurance should be used for livelihood planning at the grassroots level. Many of the research institutions are engaged in preparation of developmental plans that may include DRR concern based on hazard vulnerability and risk analysis for improved livelihood. In addition, risk proofing and monitoring and engagement of local bodies and communities are important components for ensuring livelihood. Food security and nutrition. Food security and nutrition adversely affect poor households as well as their vulnerability further get increased in post-disaster situation. The acute crisis of food and nutritional supplements severely affect women, children, old aged and disabled people. There is a need to have a sound policy at the time of disaster to provide food security and safety net for underprivileged class. In addition, there is a need to the introduction of insurance scheme for the poor community covering post-disaster losses. The following must be in the priority for providing food and security and nutrition. Public information campaign on the existence of government agricultural livestock scheme awareness generation on flood risk. Awareness generation on climate variability, training of farmers in alternate farming method, crop type and varieties, increased cultivation of drought resistant crop, diversification of crop grown in different seasons of the year, mainstreaming DRR into health services. It generally happens in India that health sector are badly affected due to disasters despite having much importance. In order to mainstream DRR intervention into health services, the first and the foremost action must be to adopt adequate policies specification to health sector. There is a need to adopt a standard quality parameter for infrastructure having focus on hazard resistant construction of hospital and health facilities. In addition, land use planning must be taken into consideration for selecting location for a structurally safe hospital or health center. It is essential for health workers to know about various provision of NDMA guideline as well as toolkit for hospital disaster management, community health worker manuals, etc. Community must be able to aware about arising health issues due to potential hazards of their area. For affecting mainstreaming, Anganwadi workers, Ashas and health volunteers must be trained on various aspects of health and hygiene during emergencies. It is also needed to ensure proper training of health workers in disaster preparedness effort. The primary health center and the community health center must be equipped to continue functioning during disaster. The community developer must also be trained into providing psychosocial support to deal with post-disaster trauma. Mainstreaming DRR in water sanitation and hygiene. In this segment of mainstreaming, also the component of policy and legislation, advocacy and awareness and coordination and capacity building play greater role. WASH policy may include provision on upgrading facilities in terms of hazard resistance and accessibility. Continuous awareness program must also be carried out for awareness generation at various levels. There should also be adequate and comfortable provision of providing dignity kit for women during after disasters. In addition, a well-structured coordination mechanism must also be there to ensure disaster-safe water and sanitation facilities. Risk proofing is another area where emphasis must be given. Risk assessment is done for the site location of water establishment, drainage system, sanitation facilities, etc. Disaster risk reduction in education sector. In this section, mainstreaming DRR in education sector is fast emerging as the important segment of disaster risk reduction in India. Keeping in view the importance of this stream, National Disaster Management Authority has issued a guideline on school safety wherein all the vital components of disaster risk reduction and safety aspects pertaining to school are detailed. In order to make new school buildings safe from disasters, a provision of disaster safe school must be promoted wherein land use planning and structural audit must be taken into consideration for new school building construction. The following must be considered while mainstreaming DRR in education sector. First is hazard resistant construction of a school. Second is retrofitting of old or existing building structure of a school. Third is promotion of DRR lesson in school curriculum. Fourth is training and capacity building for school teachers and instructors. Fifth is conduct of mock drill for teacher and student on a regular basis. Sixth is disaster insurance for teacher, student and staff. Now we will discuss about disaster risk reduction integration in environmental planning. Disaster risk reduction is closely related to environment and climate change. The compliance of environmental regulation and policy guideline can ensure better disaster risk reduction at all levels. The following must be considered for effective integration of DRR in environmental planning. The first is environmental regulation are properly compiled and periodical review is done. Second is environmental planning for reservoir safety and ecology maintenance in reservoir area. Third is public awareness on environment protection and quality control must spread. Fourth is environmental impact assessment must incorporate component of potential disaster impact assessment. Fifth is restoration of ecosystem for disaster risk reduction. Sixth is social audit for all the potential risk. Now we will summarize this module as the disaster creates severe impact on the development process and people are deprived of the outcome of development. In order to promote DRR, enable development planning, there is a need to adopt the approach of mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction into every aspect of developmental planning. The main objective of mainstreaming is the selective audit of all the ongoing scheme by governments, adoption of mitigation centering developmental approach, pragmatic approach developmental planning, incorporating all the aspects of DRR and effective compliance of DRR components. There are various sectors wherein DRR may be integrated to have a better culture of resilience at all levels. They are shelter and infrastructure management, livelihood, food security and nutrition, health services, water sanitation and hygiene, education sector and integrating disaster risk reduction in environment planning. Thank you.